We read about first some very famous cities in Mesopotamia, which, Felicia, were once thought of as the land of kings. Where would they get such an idea about that? Came from the Bible. These are all Bible cities, or a lot of them. The first ones, they were looking for them because they believed they were in the Bible, and the Bible talks about these kings and King Nebuchadnezzar and King this and King that. But now we figured out, at least they say, in the archaeological evidence, the earliest Mesopotamian cities present no clear evidence for monarchy at all. Whoa. What we do see, though, is collective forced labor, or collective labor known as Corvée, when you make people work. And usually in archaeology, when you see people made to work in a big crowd of people, you say, aha, somebody is lording it over other people and making them work. But, Felicia, in this case, who has to do Corvée? Everybody had to do it. So it's, everybody has to get in there and do some work. In fact, it's sometimes seen, or they think of it more as a leveling mechanism because everybody has to do it. Moreover, Matt, what do they think when they're doing this work?
They're usually happy about it, but that could be seen as maybe a little propaganda for the idea of it.
Yeah.
And I really like it. It says literally there are some rich people who will pay people to do the work for them to avoid it.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, this might be a bit of propaganda from the top. Be happy out there, work and be happy, just like professors. You're going to be happy to write this paper, right? Happy to learn, overjoyed, and see all your happy faces. So we're happy to work, festive labor. That might be a little bit of propaganda, but at the same time, everybody's doing it. Although, as Matt says, eventually maybe the people could pay somebody else to get out of their obligations. But in general, there'd be a feast, have some big plates of poutine at the end, be happy, festive labor. To the extent, Liz, that what do they think was going on here? Was it, what kind of government do they think they had? Collective assembly, public assembly, and this person, Jacobson, called it primitive democracy. Now they say, why should we call it primitive? Maybe we should just call it democracy. But yeah, there was sort of this town councils, people getting together in town councils and making decisions. Here we are in Mesopotamia, this area of the world, kind of about where we were in terms of Fertile Crescent. And we're really going to be concentrating on one city pretty soon, Uruk, here in modern day Iraq. So they had these town councils, seem to be governing themselves to the extent that Graeber and Wengrow say that they were organized into autonomous self-governing units. And so when other people would come in and try to lord it over them, or would come in and try to be a king, they'd either drive them out or just leave the city, leave it be. So what they say here is that it's difficult archaeologically speaking to figure out what kind of governance people had, what kind of things were there. In fact, if you're looking archaeologically for self-governance, you probably don't find much because you would find an open space where people can gather or a building where people can debate. So it doesn't really tell you what's going on there. In fact, it might be the absence of other things like the palaces, because we do see later in the day in some of these places, we see palaces and private private archaeological stuff that indicates that there were kings and rulers. So we may not have this direct evidence that they were autonomous, but they probably did. They probably had it before, because when the stuff shows up archaeologically, we can definitely see it. So this is certainly an interesting rewrite of the typical Mesopotamia story and the typical story about cities in general. They say that a lot of it is based on the city of Uruk, which we've just seen, which had a high acropolis, a place where people would debate, kind of like the more well-known Greek Acropolis. And they say that it's kind of like the reverse or the opposite of those Ukrainian mega sites where you saw an empty central area, but lots of houses, which they called all flesh and no core. In this case, you see all the public buildings, but there's not much flesh or not much housing to be seen. So they say that it seems to have been in this city that they were great communal assembly halls. You go there today, you'll see this. Yeah. It's well, it's in present day Iraq, so if you can get there, it's not easier than to go to Iran. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you can get to either of these places from here. Have to go somewhere else first. But it'll say the first written words started here. And in fact, they tell us that Uruk is most famous for writing and for giving us the whole system of classroom instruction, that you are all overjoyed to be sitting in rows, taking notes from a scribe. And this is the earliest known classroom in Uruk. There it is. Just like today. Just like today. They haven't. The format stays the same. That's right. People in rows, kind of like this classroom. They have not changed the chairs in 20 years at least. I have not seen any changes to the chairs. Just hope you're not a lefty, because there's no left-handed desks here. At least they had tables back then. Look at those nice tables. Sit there, learn things. Also, apparently, they developed a numerating system, which was partially, or there's some debate about this, but it was a base 60. So here's what you'd be learning. Be learning to count all the way up to 60 and then start again. Is there anything that we know of that you count up to 60 and then you start over again? Life. Now there is something that you count to 60 and then start over again, Gabe. Time. An hour apparently goes back through twists and turns, they say, to this 60. Also, circles, angles, 360. I don't really get it. It's too hard for me, but
That's 490.
490s. Yeah, 660s though. Think about it. I don't know. Apparently a base 60 system is really good for fractions because it's the first number that is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. There, like this. Look at that. It's cuneiform. Yeah, they're doing all kinds of things. Anyway, interesting stuff. So this is what they say happened in Uruk and the Mesopotamian cities. They also talk about the emergence of aristocracies, or what some people have labeled heroic societies, where you see things that are more like kings and warriors, ruling over other people. Those, they say, don't actually come exactly from the cities, but come from just outside, on the margins of bureaucratically ordered cities. So again, we've often been taught that kings and rulers and social classes come from cities. It seems like these kings and rulers and aristocracies, these hero societies, come sort of as in relationship to cities, a little bit outside of them. Heroic burials, an emerging cultural emphasis on feasting, drinking, the beauty and fame of the individual male warrior, appears time and again around the fringes of urban life. So what they're arguing here is that you have these relatively egalitarian public cities where people are conceiving themselves as equals and celebrating civic life and doing collective corvée labor. But it's on the edges, on the outside, perhaps in reaction to them, perhaps more like a process of schismogenesis again, although they don't use that word in this chapter. But it appears on the edges of urban life. They then take us into the Indus Valley civilization, what is known as the Indus Harappan civilization. And they talk about this would be the first urban societies in South Asia. See again, large-scale planned human settlements, the two biggest ones being Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. But we have very little to go on here because the script hasn't been deciphered, so it's pretty much archaeological evidence. Mohenjo-Daro, you see pretty impressive infrastructure. You have an upper citadel, place on a hill, and then a whole lower town to excavate. And you might think, aha, social class, especially since up in the upper citadel, there's this wonderful thing, the first bath, first place where you could go and bathe, known as the Great Bath, which is in the upper citadel. So again, you might think of this as social class distinction, but it seems like, at least archaeologically, you don't see any concentration of material wealth, neither in the upper citadel nor in the lower town. And especially since in India, the idea of caste seems to come out later, at least in its written form. Now they speculate that this could be a form of caste because there seemed to be some emphasis on ritual purity in this great bath and being able to bathe before there's kings and warriors. And so maybe this is a form of caste, but it doesn't come with the social inequalities that are most associated with caste. It's difficult to know. Again, it's hard to know from the archaeological evidence, and we don't want to just project backward. What we do know is that there's no signs that there were people who had charismatic authority, kind of like those heroic societies that we talked about, people that were able to mobilize others and lead them. So we do not have here archaeological evidence for priests or kings or warriors, or warrior nobility. We also don't see any evidence that there was a state structure governing this. And so Graeber and Wengrow say that in general, what we can see here is when we look at the Ukrainian megasites, what we now know about Mesopotamia, and what we found out about the Indus civilization, is that you can have this impressive increase in scaling up way beyond what we talked about Dunbar's number, way impressive increase in the scale without concentrating wealth or power in the hands of few, a ruling aristocracy. They make a pretty big claim here because most of the time, whenever we find archaeological evidence for scale or cities or population, we assume that there have to be state structures or rulers. And they say that archaeological research has shifted the burden of proof onto those theorists who claim causal connections between the origins of cities and the rise of stratified states, and whose claims now look increasingly hollow. Fighting words. Your claims look increasingly hollow. It's kind of like heresy here. Big words to fight with people. They're saying that it's time for you to prove that there's hierarchy, because now the burden of proof is on those who say that anytime you have scale, you have hierarchy. We don't see it in the archaeological evidence. Instead, what we see are at least three different kinds of egalitarianism. One of them being what we talked about in Mesopotamia, an emphasis on uniformity, that we're all the same, that we're all in this together, that we all have to work on the same thing, that we're all going to be happy while we're working together. Equality through, or uniform, or egalitarianism through equality. In the Ukrainian megasites, you see something different, which is egalitarianism, but because everybody's unique. You can't compare people because we all have our own artistic style. Remember, in the Ukrainian megasites, that's where they said that every household was like an artist cooperative, and they each had their distinctive style. So nobody has, it's not that everybody's the same, it's that everybody's unique and an individual, or at least at the household level. And then you have in the Indus Valley, or the Indus civilization, you have perhaps a kind of hierarchy between different parts, but you'd have equality within, or that each of the parts were equal between them. It's kind of a curious mix in which you have egalitarianism and hierarchy coming together and separating at various points. So it's difficult to say what was going on, but what we don't see is this concentrated rule in the hands of a few, either a warrior class or a king class or a noble class. Now, of course, what happened? Most of these early cities seem to have been eventually abandoned. That is, people left, they fell into ruin, and what replaced them were these heroic societies that we talked about, that were more hierarchical, more concentrated on a king or a noble, a warrior, an elite. And so what they say is it's very tempting for us to say, aha, what happens is you have these earlier egalitarian cities, and then over time, they're replaced by these much more hierarchical units, kings and princes and all that. But fortunately, we have a counterexample from China. What do you think, Gabe? Why is this so important to us?
At first, it was thought like for the Song Dynasty, that people were just like hunter-gatherers, like not doing nothing, but like there were no cities, like there was nothing to talk about really.
Nothing happening here.
Yeah.
Nothing to see.
It was boring.
Boring, yeah, boring hunter-gatherers.
But they still were actually like a lot of cities that existed prior to the Song Dynasty.
A lot of cities. So in this sort of what is now, especially these two places, Shimao and Taosi, So you have these cities coming up that seem to be at first very hierarchical, and concentrated on warfare, it seems like they say that it seems like in Tao Xi that it would be a social revolution in which these hierarchies were overthrown and abolished. The excavator says that it was a period of anarchy, but they're claiming that it's more a period of collective egalitarianism. So again, their point is that things can go in the other direction. We can start out with hierarchy and then get more egalitarian over time, or go the opposite. So what they want to tell us here is that cities were sites of social experimentation. The end of this chapter, we find out, or they claim, that the world's earliest cities were places where people were experimenting with different social forms and thinking about them. And this could result in conflicts and different ideas about it, what should be like. Importantly, so if you increase the density of a population, you then come up with a different range of social possibilities, different things that people can do with that. But in no sense does it predetermine which of those possibilities will ultimately be realized. What they're saying here is just because you increase in scale doesn't mean you increase in social hierarchy. There can be various things that happen, including the forms of egalitarianism, or maybe even revolution that we saw before.